Okay, let's get to our third speaker. Dr. Robert Lerman. Professor Lerman is a fellow at the Urban Institute. He's an emeritus professor of economics at American University, and he's also a fellow at the IZA Institute for the Study of Labor in Germany. He's one of the country's leading experts on apprenticeships. He recently established the American Institute for Innovative Apprenticeship, and he testified before Congress on youth apprenticeships. He's one of the first researchers in the country to study unwed fatherhood, and he published his findings with the second director of the National Family Impact Seminar. Now, earlier in his career, he was a lecturer here at UW-Madison in the Department of Economics, and he was a research associate with the Institute for Research on Poverty. Now, his interest in apprenticeships grew out of his experience working in a factory. They cut steel to the specifications of specific customers. He tells me that some people see factory jobs as a mundane activity, but he has seen firsthand how germane they are to the company's bottom line. There was a huge difference for the company depending on whether the workers were well trained, whether they were merely competent, or whether they were really a master of their trade. And his interest in economics began during his graduate training. So in graduate school, his dissertation was on youth unemployment, and it triggered in him a lifelong interest in kids who don't get a four-year university degree. So the title of his talk today is Apprenticeships, Helping Youth Develop the Skills Needed by Today's Employers. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here, not only because I was in Wisconsin at a key point in my career, but because Wisconsin has been a leader in apprenticeship. And in fact, in some ways, I feel I'm almost preaching to the converted, because when I looked at your biennial report, 2013 to 2015, the number 2 goal was providing high school students with school-based and work-based instruction, and the means was increase employability of high school graduates through youth apprenticeship. And the number 3 means of helping older workers was to provide individuals skill access through apprenticeship. So it's great to be here for all those reasons. Also, I want to add that this week has been designated National Apprenticeship Week by the administration, and there's lots of activities going around in the country. That was stolen from England. Well, I'll talk more about where they have a very vibrant apprenticeship program. So we do want to stimulate growth. We do want to stimulate opportunity. And question is, how do we do both? And what we see is many young people are not entering rewarding careers. And my view is that expanding apprenticeship is a mechanism by which we can achieve both improved opportunity and improved economic growth. Let's see. Now, we all have heard about shortages that companies report. There's skepticism in the economic profession about that. But nonetheless, there are articles finding shortages in key middle skill occupational areas, and we have to take those seriously. One reason to take them seriously is that, you might say, well, American companies, they just want to complain. But German companies that invest in the United States complain to their embassy that they can't find the middle skilled people. They would invest more. And so the embassy saw it as such a priority that they started what they call the Skills Initiative for the United States. A little embarrassing, but they're trying to do it on a low-key basis. I mean, they're Germans, but they feel that this is a strong need in the country, and they've gone to governors, and with mixed success. They've generated some interest, but not real scale. And manufacturers are especially outspoken on this issue. Now, what's the disconnect between what economists say and employers say? Well, very often when we think about skill, not on this podium, but in terms of measurement, when commentators say, are Americans well-skilled? Well, what do they look at? Well, what data do we collect? Well, the main data sources are how many years of school you completed or degrees, and how well you do on academic tests. Those are the measures. That's it. That's it for the country. When Tom Friedman of the New York Times writes a column, we don't have enough skills, we got to do something. What does he use? He uses those two measures. And what that does is it leads to an emphasis on formal education. Because if you're only measuring how many years of school and academic skills, where do you get that? Well, more years of education. So there are two parts. We've talked about employability skills. I don't need to belabor the point, but we don't really have a good measure of that for the workforce. So we don't know, are we doing better with employability skills or are we not doing better? Is it going down? We don't know. We don't measure it. Occupational skills. Now you'd think, having watched the World Series, that when a guy gets up there and can get a base hit or a home run, that's a real skill. Does anybody ask him, have you taken a logarithm lately? No. That's an occupational skill, a very advanced occupational skills to get to the majors. But that's an occupational skills. And again, we don't have a measure of how skilled are our people in various occupations. We have a whole variety of indicators like licensing and certification and that sort of thing, but we can't put that amount together. Now, the second thing I want to emphasize is that the structure of jobs is not fixed. It's not like, well, it's determining. It's not independent of the distribution and the method that we train people. So when the emerging skills are weak, what do firms do? They downgrade the jobs, or they move. That's it. Or they don't invest like the Germans, don't invest as much as they otherwise would when the job skills are weak. On the other hand, high skills can encourage existing and more foreign firms to enter and create more jobs. And if you want an indication of that, so we could be creating more jobs. But first we have to understand what we mean by skills. And jobs can embody many skills, especially in the sub-BA area. And this is where I kind of depart a little bit from Dan's graph. Because within each occupation, there's a wide variety of wages. I actually looked at 1,000 occupations, and I looked at the distribution within those occupations. And what I found was that the variation within, and I'm talking about very narrow occupations, policemen, very detailed occupations, detectives, and so on. The variation within those occupations accounts for about 2/3 of the overall variation. So what that means is that if you can, and if those wages reflect productivity, if you can move people even within occupations into really high levels, which Dan did discuss, then that's a way of increasing good jobs. So, these are some examples, a chef versus a cook, okay? And even within being a chef, you can be a master at it or just a mediocre one. And as I mentioned, thank you, Karen, in the earlier point about even in factories, there's good maintenance workers, there are great maintenance workers, and there's mediocre ones. Now, what good systems do, what good systems do is they improve those occupational skills. They widen the routes to occupational success. They recognize that in a whole wide range of occupations, you can have highly skilled people. The two countries, Germany and Switzerland, that offer the most apprenticeship, where in Switzerland, which has a higher income than we do in the United States, 70% of young people, 70% go through an apprenticeship. About 20% go to university, high-quality universities. But the apprenticeship programs are also very high quality, and you can go to subsequent universities. So what happens there? If you look at manufacturing and construction jobs in those two countries compared to ours, Germany, 30%, Switzerland, 23%, the United States, 13%. So these are advanced countries, okay? They have a different education and skill development system, and I'm convinced that that's a part of it. Now, as Dan said, manufacturing in Wisconsin has not declined. It has declined, but it's still significant. In construction and manufacturing, 1 out of 4 men work in those two. And if you look at total production of goods, which includes agriculture, mining, I've included transportation, half of Wisconsin men are in those occupations. I was shocked, actually. The overall number is about 30%, but half of men are in that. So we can't say that that's a marginal, that those jobs are marginal. So let's look at apprenticeships per se. What is apprenticeship? And many people don't have a really solid idea of apprenticeship. Could I get my water over there? So these are the key components of apprenticeship. So it combines several points. It's intensive learning at the workplace. It's production. This is a training program that combines not only learning, but producing. And not only learning, but also earning money while you're learning. It's not like you're just in a situation where you're giving up all the, what economists call foregone earnings you could have had during the training period. You're actually earning money, sometimes more than you might otherwise. It's related to academic instruction. It's leading to a recognized credential. And it covers a wide range of occupations. And if you want to see in 5 countries what occupations are covered, go to my website, innovativeapprenticeship.org, where I have 5 country flags. And within each cluster of occupations in each country, you can see the list of apprenticeship occupations, and then you can see what they actually do by clicking on the individual occupation. I once got a little bit in trouble because I was proudly showing this off, and I see in Germany, I said, yeah, even in hospitality and tourism, they have apprenticeships. So I clicked that cluster, and I see hotel clerk. And okay, Lerman, you're a jerk. Why do you need an apprenticeship for hotel clerk? But then I clicked on the individual occupation, and what it found was prepares invoices, analyzes sales trends, looks at customer satisfaction, a whole range of really skilled activities. So many jobs that may look like they're trivial can be enriched, and that's a good example. So the nice thing about apprenticeship is it affects both the supply side and the demand side. It affects the structure of jobs as well as the skills of workers. It also develops these skills at low government costs. because a lot of the activity is taking place at the workplace. There's an application of what you're learning, direct. It's not just like in iBest where you're in a class about an occupational skill and a class that uses some academic skills. You're actually using them in the workplace to produce something, to help that company produce. It's also a mechanism by which firms benefit. They can lower their turnover and add value, and I'll talk about that later. What it's not standard vocab for these reasons. It lacks work-based learning, real output. And it's not on-the-job training either, which tend to be short, no credentials, no real mastery. So what do we have in the United States? We have a very fragmented system. We have 26 states, of which Wisconsin is one that has its own state agency. And that's in what we call the registered system. But we have a lot of companies that do unregistered apprenticeships, that is, real apprenticeships with the characteristics I mentioned, but they're not registered with the Department of Labor. Research in this area is so sparse that we don't even know how many there are. And then we have youth apprenticeship in a few states, yay, Wisconsin. So what is youth apprenticeship? Many of you are perhaps more expert than me on it because you run these programs here in Wisconsin. So it's embedded in late high school. And youth apprenticeship, by the way, one of the reasons, even though it's a small in the U.S., I cite is because that's where apprenticeship is in Germany and Switzerland and Austria and somewhat Denmark, some of these places that have very big programs. And one convenient element is that, well, the high school is already paying for the related instruction. So the government doesn't have to pay extra money for that. And also, before you get bad habits, you learn. You can read this. I don't have time to read it, but it does generate a sense of joining a community of practice. You're part of a broader community of occupational excellence in that field. Young people are learning what it takes and how hard it is to be good at something. They're constructing adult careers, specific identities, even temporarily. They're having adult-like conversations. So when people talk about soft skills, this is it. This is where they do it, and in a natural way. And they have mentors that are following them, making sure they do well in their courses. So there's a lot of evidence that the benefits exceed the costs, not only for the workers, but that firms can actually save money and achieve low net costs. The high apprenticeship countries by far have the lowest youth unemployment. No question about it. And that's why the European Commission has a whole initiative on trying to get other countries within Europe to expand their apprenticeship. These are some data looking at the net gains to apprenticeship versus completing a community college degree in a technical field even. And what you can see, I don't have time to go through the numbers. And this is what happened to the people relative to what would have happened had they not gone into the program. And you can see that within the first few years, apprenticeship outweighs all the other programs, including the community college programs, by a margin of 5 or 10. And these are for other states. The first number was Washington State, which, by the way, they do every year a look at what happens to people in all their workforce programs. So if apprenticeship is so good, why do we persist in more of an academic approach and not use this combined work-based school-based approach that is very successful in many countries and could be successful here. And part of that, I believe, is a misplaced notion of equality. This notion that sameness is a kind of equality, but it's not. Obviously, people have different interests, different approaches, but we have, nobody wants to stand here who has a PhD or a BA even and say, oh, yeah, maybe you should go to a different approach. It's, they don't want to talk down to people. And part of it is they have no idea how skill development works in many of these fields. You do have apprenticeship, but it's still a relatively small share, very small share of your workforce, and very small share even of your youth. But I do think that it forms a wonderful base for expansion. I think one of the things that should be done is to find out why, this is not a policy recommendation, a research recommendation, is to find out what are the barriers to expanding it, how has it worked, and I'm looking to try to get some funding to look at that. These are some of the occupations. Apprenticeship has special relevance to minority youth. I just heard a talk last week highlighting these key points. What are the barriers? Well, segregation, the need for tacit knowledge, the gaining of respect and pride. And those that have never been to a graduation ceremony on apprenticeship have no idea how much pride it gives someone to have completed an apprenticeship and to master that. Special impact on boys, and cultural and structural. All these things can operate in youth apprenticeship. I can talk about that during the question time. And finally, the relevance to family formation. It has a lot of relevance because our young men especially are not doing as well in academic settings, but we're keeping them in purely academic settings for very long periods of times. They drop out. They may start post-secondary, but they drop out very often. So let me just turn, all the good things, but I want to get to, how much time do I have? 3 minutes? 4 minutes, oh, okay. Well, let me just back up on one point here. This is what I think is really valuable. It promotes a kind of maturity. So when we're talking about soft skills, again, apprenticeship does that. The mentor is very important. You have a built-in mentor. You don't have to pay extra for that. And those mentors, I was at a Wisconsin summit, I talked to an individual, and I said, well, do the mentors follow how, I kind of knew the answer, but I asked anyway, do the mentors follow how well the apprentices are doing in their schooling? He said, oh yeah. He says, if they get a C or a couple C's, they're out of the program. We follow what they're doing. And that adult mentorship is on a one-to-one basis. So it has all these wonderful attributes. But the question is, can we do it? And the usual questions are, will workers come? Number one. And more importantly, will employers provide the apprenticeships? The worker come is the easy one, because wherever we have really good apprenticeship programs, they're oversubscribed. There's a program in Newport News, Virginia, where they repair nuclear aircraft carriers. They take 250 apprentices a year. They have 6,000 applications. So that's not the problem. The problem is not if you have a good program, will young people come. And earning and learning toward a real occupational credential is a good thing, and people recognize it. Question is, what about firms? Will American firms offer it? And there's a lot of skepticism, but there is evidence that we can do it, from England and South Carolina. Oh, I'm going backwards here. So in England, they went from 150,000. This is not a Central European country with all this craft guild and all that stuff that's in Germany and Switzerland. They went from 150,000 to 850,000. Both parties are falling all over themselves to say how they can do apprenticeship better. When David Cameron was elected in his constituency and was giving his talk after having won, very cute, actually, because local area, and here's the prime minister. He says, the second thing he mentioned was apprenticeship. We need to continue to expand and build, raise quality apprenticeships. When they cut back their spending, the one thing they increased was apprenticeship in England. And they have results in that. I can talk a little bit about how their intermediaries make it happen. South Carolina, though, provides an example of growth. Not so much its high level, but its growth over the recession. And what they did is, let me get to that. They provide a $1 million for a program, $1 million per year, and a tax credit of $1,000 per apprentice. It led to an increase in the number of firms from 90 to 700 during the economic downturn. Now, their salespeople, and they branded it Apprenticeship Carolina, their salespeople in that office were very good, very talented. They could sell almost anything, but they learned about apprenticeship. They knew about business, and they managed to do it. They're continuing to do it. In youth apprenticeship, which they weren't going to do, they went from 2 firms to 82 firms in 1 year. So they're expanding. And all these are registered. So expansion at low cost is feasible, not at zero cost, but at low cost. We could offset some of that cost because students are spending less time in a schooling setting. But research is critical. And let me just conclude by highlighting, the administration has issued some grants. Wisconsin won one. What can success mean? It can mean all of these attributes that we're looking for. Country with, especially I would highlight this point here. More workers achieving occupational mastery, pride, and identity, better productivity, and more family stability. Thank you.
I'm glad you ended with family stability.